Be me, Matthias. Early 30s, work in IT for some mid-sized corporation you've never heard of. The company itself is whatever, but the job is solid. Pay is good. Work is interesting enough. My specific role is a bit of a weird one. I'm a senior systems engineer. Basically, I'm one of two guys who understands the ancient, creaking legacy systems that the entire company's core business runs on. It's a mess of old code, forgotten servers, and documentation that was probably written on a stone tablet. The other guy is Joshua. He's been here even longer than me. We're the department's plumbers. Nobody notices us when things are working, but when the pipes burst, we're the only ones they call. The rest of the team is pretty standard. There's Trey, a junior guy in his early 20s. He's sharp, eager to learn, and always asking smart questions. He sees the value in understanding the old systems and is constantly trying to pick our brains. Then there are Dahlia and Gianna. They joined a couple of years ago, perfectly competent. They handle the newer, more modern parts of our infrastructure. They do their jobs fine, no complaints. For years, the team just worked. Our boss was an old-school guy who was coasting to retirement. His management style was simple: hire smart people and get out of their way. He trusted us to do our jobs, didn't play favorites, and as long as the systems were up, he was happy. It was a true meritocracy. If you knew your stuff, you were respected. If you didn't, you learned fast, or you were gone. There was no drama, no politics. We were a team of professionals who just wanted to clock in, solve problems, and clock out. Then, a few months back, our boss finally retired. We threw him a small party, wished him well, and then waited to see who his replacement would be. The announcement came in an email. Our new team lead was an external hire named Adeline. Her bio was full of corporate buzzwords: synergizing cross-functional teams, driving impactful change, fostering inclusive innovation. My eyes glazed over just reading it. Joshua and I had a quick chat about it. We both agreed it sounded like we were in for a lot more meetings. We had no idea. Adeline's first day. She walks in, all smiles and corporate energy. She introduces herself, and immediately you can tell she's a different breed. Everything she says sounds like it was pulled from a corporate leadership seminar. I noticed she had a sticker on her company-issued laptop. It was one of those "the future is female" things. Okay, whatever. People can have stickers. The first team meeting was where the alarm bells really started ringing. She gathered us all in a conference room. We expected to talk about Q3 goals, project roadmaps, stuff like that. Instead, we got a monologue. She started by saying that her primary mission wasn't about hitting performance targets. Her goal was to rebalance the scales and transform the team's culture. She explained that the tech industry has historically been unwelcoming to women. Her top priority was creating a safe and empowering environment for the female members of our team. Joshua, who was sitting next to me, subtly raised an eyebrow. I just kept a neutral expression. Then she dropped the bombshell. She was launching a new formal mentorship program, but it was exclusively for women. Her exact words were something like, "I'll be personally mentoring Dahlia and Gianna to help them overcome the systemic barriers they face and accelerate their path to leadership." Trey, the junior guy, actually looked confused. He probably thought he misheard. Adeline went on talking about the importance of female role models and how men need to be allies by stepping back to create space for others. She didn't lay out a single technical goal for the team. The entire 45-minute meetings was about her social engineering project. We walked out of that room in silence. Trey caught up to me and Joshua in the hallway. He asked if we understood what that was about. He'd been hoping for a manager who would help him grow his skills. Joshua just clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Keep your head down, kid. Just do good work. That's all that matters." I wish he had been right. The changes started immediately. They were small at first. Adeline started having daily one-on-one meetings with Dahlia and Gianna. She called them empowerment check-ins. The rest of us got one 15-minute meeting with her per week, which she usually rescheduled. Then the project assignment started shifting. A new interesting project came down the pipeline. It involved migrating one of our services to a new cloud platform. It was a great learning opportunity. Trey was practically bouncing with excitement, hoping to get on it. He'd even done some certifications on that platform in his own time. Adeline assigned the project lead role to Dahlia. When Trey asked if he could at least be part of the project team, Adeline gave him a patronizing smile. She told him that his skills were too valuable on the legacy maintenance front right now. In other words, he was to stay in the server room with the old guys while the women worked on the shiny new resume building stuff. Joshua and I were assigned to support Dahlia's team as needed. We were effectively demoted to a help desk for her project. Dahlia, to her credit, seemed a bit embarrassed by it. She knew she was out of her depth. She'd come over to our desks multiple times a day to ask basic questions. We'd answer them, of course. We were professionals. It wasn't her fault, but it became a pattern. Dahlia and Gianna were given all the high-visibility work, and then they'd rely on us to secretly do the heavy lifting. At the weekly status meetings, Adeline would lavish praise on them. She'd talk about Dahlia's innate leadership qualities and Gianna's sharp technical instincts. We were the ghosts in the machine, invisible. The real turning point for me was the training budget incident. Our company has a decent budget for professional development, courses, certifications, conferences, and so on. Trey had found a highly respected intensive course on advanced network architecture. It was directly relevant to our work and would make the whole team stronger. He put together a detailed proposal showing the ROI and how it would help us modernize our infrastructure. He submitted it to Adeline for approval. A week went by. Nothing. He followed up. Adeline finally replied with a one-sentence email. "I'm sorry, Trey, but we don't have the budget for this at the moment." Trey was visibly crushed. He'd put a lot of work into that proposal. 2 weeks later, an email from Adeline goes out to the whole team. It was a cheerful announcement that she had approved a fantastic growth opportunity for Dahlia and Gianna. They were being sent to a week-long Women in Tech Leadership Summit in another city. The company was paying for their flights, a fancy hotel, conference tickets, and a daily per diem. I did a quick search for the summit. The tickets alone cost more than double what Trey's technical course did. The silence in the office was deafening. Trey just put on his headphones and stared at his screen for the rest of the day. Joshua went for a very long walk. I realized then that this wasn't just mismanagement. This was intentional. We weren't just being ignored. We were being actively held back to make room for others. Our contributions were being used to fuel their growth, while ours was intentionally stunted. It wasn't about building a stronger team. It was about building a team that fit her ideological image. After Dahlia and Gianna came back from their summit, things got even worse. They were full of confidence and corporate jargon they had picked up at the conference. They started talking about disrupting paradigms and leveraging our core competencies. Meanwhile, the actual core competencies of the team were sitting at 2 desks in the corner, patching a 15-year-old server that was on the verge of collapse. The atmosphere in the team had completely changed. It used to be collaborative. Now it was divided. There was Team Adeline, which consisted of her and her 2 mentees. And then there was us, the maintenance crew. She even started holding separate meetings. She'd book a conference room for herself, Dahlia, and Gianna to have strategic brainstorming sessions. The rest of us would be in the main office, keeping the systems from exploding. The breaking point for Joshua came a little while after that. It was a Tuesday, I think. A critical system failed. One of the main databases that handled all of our customer transaction data just died. This was a code red, all-hands-on-deck situation. Every minute the system was down, the company was losing a significant amount of money. The entire department was in a panic. Joshua and I immediately started diagnostics. It was a complex issue. a rare type of data corruption linked to a hardware controller failure. We'd seen something similar years ago. We knew the fix. It was delicate and required a specific, non-intuitive sequence of commands to restore the data without losing anything. Joshua was about to start the recovery process when Adeline physically stepped in front of his desk. She held up her hand. She announced to the panicked managers gathered around that this was a perfect learning experience. She turned to Gianna. "Gianna, I want you to take the lead on this. I know you can handle it." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Gianna looked like a deer in headlights. She knew she was in way over her head. Joshua just stared at Adeline. He didn't say a word. He just calmly looked at her. He told her plainly that this wasn't the time for a training exercise. The business was hemorrhaging money. He needed to act now. Adeline's response was ice cold. She said she was disappointed by his lack of a team player mindset and his unwillingness to share opportunities for growth. She told him to step back and let Gianna handle it, but to provide guidance if she asks. So Joshua leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms and he watched. What followed was 2 hours of pure chaos. Gianna, with Dahlia and Adeline hovering over her shoulder, started typing commands she was finding on internet forums. With every command she ran, I could see the problem getting worse. She was destroying the recovery logs. I tried to step in once to suggest a different approach. Adeline cut me off. She said my negative energy wasn't helpful and that I needed to trust the process and her leadership. So I shut up too. I sat back down at my desk and updated my resume. After 2 hours of failure, with the director of our entire department now screaming on the phone, Adeline finally caved. Her confident corporate mask was gone. She was pale with panic. She walked over to Joshua's desk, avoiding eye contact, and said in a quiet voice, "Okay, maybe you should take a look." Joshua didn't move for a solid 10 seconds. Then he slowly leaned forward, took the keyboard, and without saying a single word, began to work. The entire room was silent, watching him. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was running complex commands from memory, navigating the ruined system with a surgeon's precision. It took him 25 minutes. 25 minutes to undo 2 hours of damage and fix the original problem. He ran a final verification script. The data was intact. The system was back online. He pushed the keyboard back, stood up, and looked directly at Adeline. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her. Then he picked up his jacket, walked out of the office, and didn't come back. He emailed his resignation that evening. The next day, there was a mandatory team meeting. Adeline announced Joshua's departure. She spun it as in deciding to pursue other opportunities. She then tried to frame the previous day's disaster as a success. She praised Gianna for her courage in the face of a challenge and the valuable lessons the entire team learned about resilience. Not a single word of thanks or acknowledgement for Joshua, the man who actually saved the day. She was talking, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about my conversation with Joshua the night before. He'd called me after he resigned. He wasn't angry, he was just done. He told me he realized that no amount of skill or experience mattered in that new environment. He said he felt like a tool that was being used to build a monument to someone else's ideology, and the tool was about to be discarded once it was no longer useful. He had a new job lined up already, a senior position at a company that valued his expertise. They were paying him a lot more, too. He wished me luck. He told me to watch my back. After Joshua left, the full weight of his responsibilities fell on me. I was now the sole guardian of all the company's critical legacy systems. Adeline didn't seem to grasp the significance of this. In her mind, Joshua was just one employee. He was replaceable. She posted his job opening online and seemed to think someone with 15 years of institutional knowledge would just walk in the door. My workload doubled overnight. I was constantly putting out fires, patching systems, and dealing with the mess left behind by years of technical debt. At the same time, Team Adeline was focusing on their shiny new projects. They were having long meetings about branding, user interface, and marketing strategies for the new cloud service they were slowly building. I was in the digital trenches, keeping the company alive while they were planning the victory parade. Trey was also miserable. With Joshua gone, he had no one to learn from but me, and I was too swamped to give him the time he deserved. He was stuck doing the most basic, mind-numbing support tickets. His ambition was slowly being ground down into apathy. I tried to raise the alarm. In my one-on-one with Adeline, I laid out the risks. I showed her the metrics. System instability was rising. Response times were slowing. We were one major hardware failure away from a catastrophe much worse than the last one. I told her that we urgently needed to hire a senior engineer with specific experience, not just a junior person we could train. I practically begged her to pause the new projects and let Dahlia and Gianna help me stabilize the core infrastructure. Her response was telling. She looked at my charts and data with a bored expression. Then she told me I needed to adopt a more positive mindset. She said that focusing on problems instead of solutions was a sign of toxic masculinity, and that I was resisting change because I felt threatened by female leadership. I was speechless. I had just handed her a detailed, data-driven risk assessment, and she had responded by psychoanalyzing me through a political lens. It was at that moment I knew I had to leave. It wasn't a question of if, but when. My loyalty to the company, to the systems I had spent years building and maintaining, was completely gone. My new loyalty was to myself. I started quietly searching for a new job. I didn't tell anyone. I updated my resume with all the crisis management work I had been doing. It turned out to be quite impressive. Recruiters started calling me almost immediately. While Adeline was busy empowering her chosen ones, I was planning my escape. I continued to do my job. I kept the systems running, but I stopped going above and beyond. I did exactly what was required of me and not a single thing more. I stopped warning Adeline about potential problems. I stopped documenting potential improvements. If she wanted to run the ship into an iceberg, I was no longer going to stand in her way. I was just going to make sure I was safely in a lifeboat when it happened. A couple of weeks later, I got the offer I was waiting for. It was a lead architect role at a well-respected tech firm. A huge step up in title, responsibility, and most importantly, salary. I accepted it on the spot. Now, all that was left was to drop the bomb. I scheduled the meeting with Adeline for the following morning. I walked into her office, sat down, and got straight to the point. No small talk. I told her I was resigning to accept another position and that my last day would be in 2 weeks. For the first time since I'd met her, she was completely silent for about 15 seconds. She just stared at me. It was like her brain was short-circuiting, unable to process this information through its usual filters. Then the corporate mask came back on, but it was cracked. The first thing she did was try to make it about her. She said she was surprised and a little disappointed that I hadn't come to her to discuss my feelings of dissatisfaction first. She suggested that we could have worked through my resistance to the new team culture together. I didn't take the bait. I just said it was a career opportunity I couldn't pass up. Then she shifted tactics. She moved from fake concern to subtle accusation. She talked about loyalty. She said it was a challenging time for the team, and that my departure would put my colleagues under a lot of pressure. She was essentially trying to guilt me into feeling bad for abandoning them, conveniently forgetting that she was the one who had created the toxic environment I was escaping from. This was the woman who had ignored my warnings, belittled my expertise, and actively sabotaged the career growth of half her team. Now she was lecturing me on loyalty. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I just maintained a polite, neutral expression. I told her that I was fully committed to ensuring a smooth transition during my final 2 weeks. I said I would do everything in my power to transfer my knowledge and document my responsibilities. Her face hardened. She realized the guilt trip wasn't working, so she moved to her final tactic, dismissal. She put on a breezy, unconcerned act. Well, Matthias, we'll be sad to see you go, of course, but this will be a good chance for others to step up. We're building a resilient team here, and change is part of growth. She was trying to frame my departure as an insignificant event, a minor shuffle that would ultimately be a net positive for her grand project. She was trying to convince herself more than me that I wasn't important, that my skills were not unique. I just nodded. I understand. I'll start working on the handover documentation immediately. I stood up, thanked her for her time, and walked out of her office. When I got back to my desk, the news had already started to spread. Trey looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He came over and quietly asked if it was true. I told him it was. He didn't say much, but I could see the despair in his eyes. First Joshua, now me. He was being left behind. I told him to hang in there and to focus on learning as much as he could. Dahlia and Gianna just glanced over at me with an unreadable expression. Maybe it was concern. Maybe it was a flicker of fear. They had to know on some level how much they relied on me. The next 2 weeks were a complete farce. I called the process a knowledge transfer, but it was more like trying to teach calculus to a toddler. I set up a series of meetings with Dahlia and Gianna to walk them through the core systems. It was hopeless. These were not simple modern applications with user-friendly interfaces. This was a tangled web of decades-old architecture. You couldn't just learn it from a manual. You had to understand its history, its quirks, its personality. I would try to explain the logic behind a critical process, and their eyes would just glaze over. They'd nod and say, "Uh-huh," but they weren't getting it. They lacked the fundamental ground-level experience because Adeline had made sure they never had to get their hands dirty. They had been so busy attending leadership summits and working on high-level strategy for their cloud project that they never learned the basics of the very systems that paid their salaries. The most frustrating part was Adeline's constant interruptions. She would pop into our knowledge transfer sessions and pull Dahlia and Gianna out for an urgent mentorship huddle or a strategic alignment meeting. It was clear she still considered my work, the actual engine of the company, to be low-priority maintenance. She was more concerned with their career development PowerPoints than with the stability of the entire business. After a few days of this, I gave up on trying to teach them anything meaningful. I realized they were a lost cause. Adeline had set them up for failure. So I changed my strategy. I focused all my energy on creating the most detailed, comprehensive documentation I possibly could. I worked late every night. I wrote hundreds of pages. I drew diagrams. I created step-by-step recovery guides for every conceivable disaster scenario. I commented every line of critical code. I documented every server, every IP address, every password. I was creating a Bible, a survival guide for the apocalypse I knew was coming. I put it all in a single, well-organized folder on the shared drive. I named it Core Systems. Do not touch unless you have read this entire document. I knew they wouldn't read it, but I also knew that when everything fell apart, no one could ever accuse me of not doing my job. I had done everything possible to hand over the keys to the kingdom. It wasn't my fault if the new rulers didn't know how to open the door. My last day arrived. It was a strange feeling. I spent the morning deleting my personal files and cleaning out my desk. Trey came by to say goodbye. He looked defeated. I gave him my personal contact info and told him to reach out if he ever needed anything or if he started looking for a new job. I told him he was a smart kid and deserved better than this. Dahlia and Gianna gave me a polite, awkward farewell. They handed me a "sorry you're leaving" card that everyone had signed. Adeline's signature was a quick, impersonal scroll. My exit interview with HR was a joke. The HR person asked me why I was leaving. I just gave the standard professional answer. I found a new opportunity that better aligns with my long-term career goals. I didn't mention Adeline. I didn't mention the toxic environment. I didn't mention the impending doom. It wasn't my problem anymore. Snitching wouldn't benefit me in any way. The company had made its bed, and now it was time for them to lie in it. My final meeting was with Adeline. It was short and cold. She asked if the handover was complete. I told her that all my knowledge had been documented and was available on the shared drive. She nodded, looking vaguely satisfied, as if a detailed manual could replace a decade of experience. She wished me luck in my future endeavors with all the sincerity of a robot. I walked out of her office, went back to my desk, picked up my small box of personal items, and walked towards the exit. I didn't look back. Walking out of that building felt like taking my first breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long. I felt free. The first week at my new job was amazing. It was like stepping into a different universe. My new boss was an engineer himself. He understood the tech. He respected my experience. My colleagues were all incredibly smart and professional. There were no politics, no ideology, just a shared focus on building good technology. I was given challenging, meaningful work from day one. I felt valued. I felt respected. It was everything my old job used to be before Adeline. About 10 days after I left, I got a text from Trey. It just said, "It's happening." My heart didn't sink. I didn't feel panic. I just felt a cold, quiet sense of vindication. I replied, "What happened?" His response came back in a flurry of messages. He told me that one of the main database servers had suffered a catastrophic hardware failure. It wasn't just any server. It was the one I had specifically warned Adeline about months ago. The one with the failing RAID controller. The one she had refused to approve a replacement for because the budget was needed for more strategic initiatives. The server's failure had a domino effect. It took down the company's entire customer-facing platform. No one could log in. No new orders could be placed. The entire business was dead in the water. Panic had erupted. The director of the division was screaming. Customers were flooding the support lines, and Adeline was in the center of the storm. According to Trey, her first move was to project absolute confidence. She gathered the team and announced that this was a test of their resilience, but she had full faith in their abilities. She officially assigned Dahlia and Gianna as co-leads on the recovery effort. She told them this was their moment to shine. Trey said they both looked terrified. They went straight to my documentation. They opened the Bible I had left for them, but it was useless to them. They were like someone who had been given a dictionary and asked to write a novel. They could look up the words, but they didn't understand the grammar or the story. They spent the next few hours in a conference room staring at my diagrams and getting nowhere. The pressure was mounting. The financial losses were climbing into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per hour. Finally, Adeline's corporate confidence shattered. She realized her star mentees were failing. So she did the worst possible thing. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She, a mid-level manager with no hands-on technical experience in over a decade, was going to fix it herself. Trey said he watched in horror as she sat down at the terminal. Dahlia and Gianna just stood behind her, looking on helplessly. Adeline, in her panic, had apparently been searching online for solutions. She had found a blog post with a title like, "Easy 5-Step Database Recovery." She started trying to follow the steps. The first command she ran was a benign one, to check the status of the backup logs. But she must have made a typo. Or maybe she was in the wrong directory. Trey wasn't sure. What he was sure of was the result. Instead of checking the logs, she ran a command that reinitialized them. In a single, irreversible action, she had effectively wiped the only clean record of the most recent transactions. She had destroyed the primary backup mechanism. An error message flashed on the screen. Even Adeline, with her limited knowledge, seemed to understand that it was very, very bad. The system wasn't just down anymore. It was well and truly broken. The path to a simple recovery was now gone. That was when the director of the division stormed in. He saw the error message. He saw the look of utter terror on Adeline's face. He didn't yell. According to Trey, it was much scarier than that. He just spoke in a low, cold voice and told everyone to step away from the keyboard. He got on the phone and called in a team of external emergency consultants. The kind of specialists that cost thousands of dollars per hour. Trey spent the next 3 days just trying to stay out of their way. The consultants were brutally efficient. They took over the server room. They worked around the clock, barely speaking to any of the full-time staff. It took them nearly 72 hours to rebuild the system from older off-site backups. They managed to restore the core functionality, but they couldn't recover the last 24 hours of transaction data. It was just gone forever. The financial cost was massive, not just in lost business, but in the consultant's astronomical bill, and the potential lawsuits from customers who had lost data. The reputational damage was even worse. On the 4th day, the consultants delivered their final report to the senior leadership. Trey managed to catch a glimpse of the executive summary. It was a bloodbath. The report identified the root causes of the disaster with surgical precision. It mentioned chronic underinvestment in core infrastructure, failure to act on repeated warnings from senior technical staff, and a critical loss of irreplaceable institutional knowledge. The final nail in the coffin was the section on the recovery attempt. It described the initial response as chaotic and amateurish, and the final, fatal command run by Adeline as an act of gross and unforgivable negligence. The next morning, Adeline was called into a meeting with the director and the head of HR. She was in there for less than 10 minutes. Trey saw her walk back to her office accompanied by a security guard. She didn't look at anyone. She just packed her few personal belongings into a small cardboard box. The guard then escorted her out of the building. She was gone. Fired so fast her email account was disabled before she even reached the parking lot. Dahlia and Gianna weren't fired. Their punishment was arguably worse. They were stripped of all their interesting projects and reassigned the most basic, entry-level help desk tasks. They had become a cautionary tale, the living symbols of Adeline's disastrous experiment. Their careers at that company were over. A couple of months have passed since then. My new job is fantastic. I've already been promoted to a team lead position. My skills are valued. My opinion is sought out, and I'm compensated fairly for my contributions. I got a text from Trey last week. The old team is still in shambles. They're trying to hire 2 senior engineers to replace me and Joshua, but no one with any experience wants to touch that dumpster fire. He asked if my new company was hiring. I told him we were. I walked over to my boss's office and told him about a sharp, ambitious junior engineer I knew who was being wasted in a bad environment. Trey has an interview next week. I think he's going to do great. Looking back, it's all so clear. Adeline came in with a pre-written story in her head, a story about oppression and empowerment, about heroes and villains. She tried to force reality to fit her narrative. She picked her protagonists and her antagonists. But she made a fatal mistake. She forgot that servers don't care about ideology. Data doesn't respond to social justice. Competence is real, and incompetence has consequences. She tried to build a team based on her political ideals instead of on merit. And in the end, reality had the final say. Her perfect world came crashing down, and all she was left with was a cardboard box and a walk of shame. She didn't just fail. She created the very disaster that her worldview supposedly fought against, all while punishing the people who were trying to prevent it. I didn't do anything to make her fail. Neither did Joshua. We just left. We chose to go where we were valued, and in the end, that was enough.